I'm going to talk about homeschooling today, and I thought I'd just give a brief introduction. This is my family. I have 8 children, and I was raised in the context of this community, and I was homeschooled my whole life. And now I am homeschooling my own 8 children. I also have 4 grandchildren, and 1 that's almost here. And I'm looking forward to helping home educate them as well. We have already graduated 4 of our children, and I still have 4 in school, and 3 of them are married. So that's my family, and that's my credentials. So I'm hoping I can inspire you today about homeschooling. We have had quite a journey through the years that's led us to the place we are today, and I will go ahead and say up front, we're still on a journey, and that is the beauty of homeschooling, is that it is an adventure, and it is a journey, as is parenting. If you're parenting, you know you're parenting different by the time you get down the road a few children than you were when you started. So why homeschooling? That is the question I wanted to start with, is why are we homeschooling? When my parents' generation started homeschooling, it was a very rare thing. There was only probably a few thousand people actually doing it. There was questions about the legality of it in many of the states in this country, but they felt a burning desire in their heart to do that, and I'm going to get into that story a little bit. But now, homeschooling has grown exponentially. In the last decade, there are millions of people homeschooling in this country, and for probably many different reasons. So that's one of the focuses I want to make, is why are we homeschooling? Because it will affect your approach and how you do it, and I believe the outcome of your schooling. Your philosophy on why you're doing it will affect that. So am I homeschooling because it's a God-given calling? God gave me these children, and He has equipped me specifically to shape and mold their character, their perspective, their outlook on the world? Or am I homeschooling only because it's safer? So I think one of the shifts that we've seen in this country toward homeschooling is because of the deterioration in the public school environment in the larger culture. We've never had children that are more depressed, more lonely, more suicidal, and we all know all of the statistics about what has happened in the in the public schools in the recent years, the violence, the drug abuse, the bullying. It is a constant threat to our children, and a lot of people are concerned about that. And so home education becomes a reaction against that negative thing that's going on in the public school, which that's important. Our children's physical safety is very important, but it can't be the only motivator, or we're going to not see perhaps the results that we would like to see specifically in our community. So I'd like to just tell a little bit about what our journey as a community has been in terms of homeschooling. So as I said, my parents' generation started homeschooling, and our church, for those of you who don't know, it began as an inner city mission on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in New York City. So very different than what you're seeing today, the fields, the gardens, the horses. That was not in existence when our church began. It was a small chapel in the worst part of New York City. And when my parents were going to begin schooling my older brother, they walked down the street. This was in 1973, so before I was born. They walked down the block to where he would go to school, and it was past the Hells Angels headquarters and a methadone clinic and derelicts in the street, and they got there to a school surrounded by concertina wire and said, "Is this where we're going to really put our children? Is this who we're going to trust? Are we going to let them walk down here and go to school?" And they realized that the entire culture surrounding that school was caustic to everything they were trying to cultivate in their little church. And from our church's beginning, we have believed that relationships with God, relationships with one another, relationships in family, relationships in community, and ultimately relationships with creation were of ultimate priority. That if these relationships could be right, we could have an environment where things could really grow. And so they were questioning a lot of things, and education became a big question mark in their minds. Can this grow the kind of relationships we want to happen between parents and children? If we place our son here, is that what we're going to see? Are we going to see a relationship with God developing in this culture? And my dad often said, I put it up here on the screen, just as bananas won't grow in Alaska, and I added, and rhubarb won't grow in Brazil, healthy relationships will not thrive in a caustic environment. And so our journey has really been looking for a culture in which these relationships with God, with our fellow man, and with creation can thrive. And homeschooling is not separate from that for us. We don't view homeschooling as the bucket labeled academics that we've just got to fill up in 12 years. We view it as a part of our entire life. We want to bring integration and wholeness into every area so that we're not educating over here and we're playing with a totally different group of people over here, and we're worshiping with a totally different group of people over here, and we're working and our children are over there. We want to bring continuity and integration into everything so that there is wholeness in our lives, in education and in our worship, in our play, in our work. And bringing that wholeness has been a big part of our journey. So when my parents began, there was no homeschool curriculum. We're all very spoiled now. There are lots of options, lots of possibilities, but back when their generation began, there were none. And so they were piecemealing their work together with taking curriculums from the public schools, from private schools, from Christian schools, and trying to piece together a whole in which we could be educated. And it was a learning process. And pretty soon into it, they realized, a lot of these curriculums do not really have the core message that we're looking for our children. And so they started trying to develop their own. And that is what I'm going to present here in a few minutes, but it is a work in process, but we have the central part of our education that we have developed ourselves, but we still use a lot of other curriculums that we find helpful, beneficial, and to support what we're doing as well. So, the escaping versus embracing model. We'll just recap that a little bit. An embracing model has a lot of positive potential. This says, my calling as a parent, as a mother, is to educate my child. When you view, a lot of people talk about a calling they have on their lives. I'm called to be a missionary. I'm called to be a doctor. And they pour everything, their time, their education, their money, their hours spent, they pour it into what they feel that they're called to. And if you feel that I am called by God to educate these children, He's given them to me and it is part of my calling, you're going to have that different angle on how you do it. You're going to spend more time on it. You're going to invest a different level than if it's just, I'm escaping, which is fear-driven. You're going to build, if it's your calling, you're going to build character in your children. You're going to build relationships. And the truth of the matter is that they're going to get educated in the process. Yes, there's going to be a lot of didactics, but just building that relationship is going to start the education process in your children. If it's all about just escaping, it tends to be fear-driven. It's what you're not doing. It's what we want to avoid. It's what everything is about, avoidance. And the focus on harm you end up a lot of times duplicating the kind of education, the kind of information, the kind of hours spent that the public schools have can end up being duplicated in your home instead of an entirely different culture. So we've tried to sort of scrape the plate and say, let's start at the beginning. What is this supposed to look like? And instead of asking, how can we escape, we're asking, what can we build? What can we build if we build education into our lifestyle, if it becomes a part of who we are? I want to tell just a little bit of my personal story and how my education of my own children went through a radical transformation. So this is my 5th child, Christopher, and when we had him, he was born in 2007, and in 2010, when he was 3 years old, we discovered that he was severely autistic. And this sort of shook the foundation of what I thought it meant to be a parent and to teach. And so I began a journey with this that not only changed my approach to teaching Christopher, but my approach to teaching in general. And what I started realizing is, as he didn't hit the milestones, he was 3 years old, he was completely non-communicative, and more than that, he really had no recognition of me as his mother. He didn't look to me, he didn't look at me, he didn't look at anybody. He was completely isolated and in his own world and in every way. And it suddenly seemed, what is the meaning of teaching, sorry, this jumped ahead. I've never used these iPad things for my presentation, so I apologize. But I wanted to show you some pictures. But I thought, what is the meaning of learning to sound out words and know your ABCs if you don't even recognize your own parents? And it just set things in a different tone for me. The purpose then became, in his education, to build connections, to say, we have got to have a relationship. We have got to connect with this child so that he even knows who he is. He didn't know that his hands were for eating. He would eat like a little puppy out of the dish, and the hands were useless. He didn't know how to say yes or no. And so the first thing in our journey was, how do we connect? How do we get him to even look at us? And we backed up a lot, and we just began to reassess everything. And what I realized is that with any child, we can just hit these milestones and say, okay, good, they learned their ABCs, they're 3. Oh, good, they're 5, they're starting to recognize sounds. Oh, good, they're 6, they're starting to sound out words. And we hit all the milestones, and we don't ever develop the relationship that will really make this work, that will really transform the child. And so education began to change. The meaning of it for me began to change, and I realized education is a facilitator for relationships, for connections, to build time and connections with my children. And if you're going to, there are different models with curriculum. And if you're going to park your child in front of a computer and let it educate them, while that certainly would be better than leaving them in the public school, it isn't going to be quite the same as if you're going to sit down with your children and read together and discuss together and write together and play together. And that is for us what the purpose of our education is let's learn together as a family. And I'm going to show exactly how that works in our family so that hopefully you can see how it functions and how it works itself out in a day. The center of our education is reading and writing. We feel like if your children can read, love to read, and read comprehensively, write, love to write, and write articulately, they're going to be able to learn anything in life as they go on. My parents placed a huge emphasis on this with us, and some of my favorite memories of growing up were writing workshops where we would sit together as a family and write about our experiences and then read them out loud to one another. So reading and writing are the center of our education. We recognize that as parents, we don't know everything. We aren't going to be able to teach our children every single thing that they'll ever need to know in life. But what we can do is we can create a love and almost a compulsion in our children to learn. We can give them that desire to read, to learn, to listen, to speak and articulate the things that they've learned, the things that they've experienced. And if that happens, then they will go on learning for the rest of their lives. And something I've told my children is, if you graduate and you don't have that in you, you aren't obsessed with learning, with reading, with writing, with sharing God's word, then I failed you. I failed to do what I set out to do. So that's my goal, is to give them that love of learning. And I would say we have our homeschool framework is three-pronged. So I've made these three arrows here. As I just said, reading and writing is the foundation of that core of our education. Reading and writing articulately, comprehensively. And we have a number of curriculum books here that I'll go over here momentarily that I'll explain how they work. But reading and writing is the core. We're people of the word. We're supposed to be living epistles. We feel like that has to be the core. Plus, it pulls us all together. Family workshop is another prong in the three prongs. Family workshop learning is collaborative learning that strengthens family bonds and challenges the younger to live up to higher expectations as they hear the older kids, what they write, what they discuss. And then the unit study approach is the third prong. And unit study, it means a lot of things in this day and age. I've heard different things that it's supposed to mean. But for us, what a unit study is recognizing that there are times and seasons in an agricultural environment that allow your education to flow with those seasons. So, for instance, if it's spring planting and we are all involved in planting in the garden, a big part of our garden, our writing, our reading is going to be about preparing the garden, preparing the soil, the pH in the soil. And as I'll go through each of these in turn, but that just recognizes the seasons that we're in and makes the education a part of those agricultural seasons. So we'll talk first about the reading and the writing foundation, and I'll just briefly go over each of the different curriculum elements that we have. All of these are centered around what we read and write, what we do in our reading and writing with our children. So we have over here on the bottom right-hand corner, we have a Bible reader series. So this series goes through the narrative side of the Bible, and it's told in a simpler form for children. It's geared toward about 11 or 12 years old. So we did it in that way so that the whole family could enjoy it. It wouldn't be boring to the older kids, and it wouldn't be too challenging for the younger kids, but we would sit down in any given day. I'll just kind of explain this as I would do it in my day. But we would sit down any given school day and read together out of the Bible and the Bible Reader series. And some people do it on an everyday basis where they read part of it one day and part of it the next day, and et cetera. I won't get into all the details of that. It's explained in the curriculum. But a lot of people will do it once a week and then spend the whole week working out the assignments so that they can read other things on their reading time in the different days. But there's a story section, and that would tell, I'll just use the example of, say, Isaac and Rebekah, or Eliezer and Rebekah. When Eliezer goes to the well and he meets Rebekah, he asks her for a drink. He asks the Lord that whoever he asks for a drink, and then they offer his camels, that would be the woman. And so she comes, and it tells this whole story, but she comes, and she offers for his camels. So then with the story, there's an accompanying character study. What is the character trait that we see in exemplified through Rebecca? Anybody?
Willingness, generosity, service.
Yeah, so service, initiative. So then there's going to be an accompanying study about what it means to take initiative in our service. And that would go with it. We have done a complete revision on the first one. We will have one for each book, a new revision. But the first one has a complete revision that includes poetry as well, memorization for the children to learn about those character traits. So we would read that together as a family. Each kid can take turns reading parts of it, and then we would have a family discussion about it. Asking the questions, or study questions right in there, asking questions about what did you learn? When is the time that you took initiative? But trying to pull everybody in such a way that they can really comprehend what was going on in that story and what God might be speaking to us through it, that he put it in the Bible in the first place. So going along with that, and I'll hold this up so you can see this a little bit more clear. We have a parent guide, and there is, as you can see over here in the middle, there's a writing curriculum. It's called Write Words. Those two are geared mostly around creative writing. So these are going to be writings about your experience, your day, the scene out your window, but creative writing, story type of writings. And then the next one next to that says Mastering Words is more expository writing. It's going to teach about summarizing. It's going to teach about essays, book reports, things like that. And we have this book that goes with the readers that pulls both of those books into each of the lessons, and it gives on the different levels that the children are at. So those level 1, 2, and 3, which will cover, level 1 is going to cover 3rd through 4th grade, level 2 is 5th through 6th, and 7th and up is level 3. And it will give activities based on those readers for each of those levels to do. So the idea is that more and more we can do things together. We can write together, we can read together, we can discuss together, and then we send the kids maybe to their room afterward to do homework. Does that make sense? Do you have questions about that specifically? Okay, thank you. So that is the core of the reading and the writing. And then over here we have a new book, Creative Writing Activities, and it takes the basic things that they will learn in their family workshop and gives them activities to practice all week. There's a picture writing exercise in there that they would learn in a family workshop, and then they can practice it again and again in here. And there's all different kinds of poetry and different things that they can practice with this. So that is the first prong, reading and writing. I just have this up here to show that there are supplementary books that we would give older children and younger children after the core family reading that would be more advanced. All the character studies that are in that Bible reader are based on this book that's much more comprehensive, building Christian character, and the older kids could then go in their homework and read more studies on that. I'm going to skip over. I had these blown up. Okay. Family workshop learning. So this is the middle prong, the second one. So I've already really been over this some, but the idea is that we're going to learn as a family, not just the reading, but the writing. And here you can see in this picture, I'm teaching my children as well as some of my nieces and nephews. We sometimes will collaborate with other family members, other families that are nearby, neighbors, friends, whatever. And it produces a really nice dynamic of everybody contributing to it. But the idea with the workshop is that we would take lessons, and this is all lined out in the curriculum, but lessons out of those writing books, the Mastering Words, the Write Words, and learn them together as a family. So we would all do a writing that was a poem or a riddle or a picture. We'd put up a picture, a painting, and everybody would write what they thought might be happening in that. It challenges the younger students. It challenges everyone. And as I said earlier, some of my favorite memories are reading together with our writings together with my family and just really getting to know one another and find out what was inside of everybody. So the third is the unit study approach. And this approach, like I said, it has to do with the season. So for example, when I was expecting my 8th child, my first 7 kids came in a 14-year period, and then we had a 9-year gap, and I had another baby. It was a big surprise, but I was 45, and it slowed everything way down. And my husband wanted me to be on rest a lot, and so I thought, how is this going to affect our school? Well, we had the idea that since we were expecting a baby, and this was very novel, we would do a study on the human body, and as it develops through the 40 weeks of pregnancy, a unit study, and just learn about that. And we did that throughout the pregnancy. We learned about how the lungs and the heart function and work together, and the brain, and all paralleling with the weeks of the pregnancy, what's going on with our new baby brother or sister. And the same applies to the garden. If we're working in the garden, and instead of just getting out a random biology book, let's learn about how to understand the pH in the soil and how it is affecting our crops. And can we plant strawberries here with an acidic pH, or do we need to add something? And all of these things begin to make the learning much more meaningful. So that brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, and that is connecting learning and how we actually remember how things work. So I thought I'd just do a quick experiment here and ask you guys a question, see if you can help me out. But just say 2 or 3 people here, tell me in 2, maybe 3 sentences, something you learned growing up in life, whether it was in school, whether it was in an activity, but something that impacted you, something important that you learned. It can be something you learned about history, about the Civil War, about the Depression. It could be something in algebra, whatever. But tell me if you have some memory of when you learned something that impacted you never forgot. When I remember very clearly learning about the Irish potato famine. So we were sitting around the table, and we had just harvested our potato crop. I was living in Colorado at the time. We just harvested our potato crop. We were super excited about the first meal of mashed potatoes, and my father taught us about the Irish potato famine. Okay? So I remember also learning about the Great Depression. I was riding horses with Jan Pfeiffer, who is actually my son-in-law's grandmother, but I had no idea, he didn't exist. But I was riding horses with her, and she was telling me about people wearing flour sacks during the Great Depression, and I asked her if she had been part of it. She was born in 1940s. So anyway, I learned about it, not just when it happened, but the people in her family who had been affected by it, what people were wearing, what parts of the country were most affected by it. And really, almost everything that I remember in my life that has been meaningful to me, that I have retained, is connected in some way, just as some of you pointed out. Your mother-in-law teaching you Chinese food, your professor that you liked in college, scratching out the meaningless sentences. But they're always connected to something, someone, something, some event that somehow made this salient for you. And they've actually done these studies on the brain to understand why people remember certain things and why they don't. So if we have thousands and thousands of bits of information coming into us all the time, more than we should now with the introduction of technology. But say you drive down I-35 and you pass hundreds of billboards, hundreds, if not thousands of buildings just going through this town, hundreds of cars. There's license plates, there's colors, there's also birds flying over, there's just a lot of information coming in constantly as you are driving down I-35. So if it's me driving down I-35, I will get from one side of Waco to the other, and I don't remember one thing. I'm not going to remember the color of one car. Now, my 5-year-old or my 12-year-old, they might remember the colors of all the cars and the brands and whatever, but I'm not going to remember the color of one car. I'm not going to remember the model. I'm not going to remember the buildings. I'm not going to remember the billboards. But when I pass the billboard that says something about the cheese shop right up here on our property, I'll remember everything about it. Exactly what it looked like, what it said, what colors. I'll remember everything about it. Why is that? Because it means something to me. And what they've done, what they've learned about the human brain is that, and I'm not going to get too scientific here, but is that the short-term memory, it's all in the prefrontal cortex, and you see all this stuff and you remember it for a few seconds. But if you want to actually remember something in such a way that it becomes a part of you, becomes a part of your worldview, a part of your understanding, it has got to be connected to a constellation of meaning. Other relationships, other experiences, it has got to somehow be connected to a constellation of meaning. So I'm summarizing everything that I've told you thus far about why we're trying to bring our education into our whole life, part of our agriculture, part of our pregnancies, part of our family trips, in such a way that this actually will have effect on the child's outlook on the world, that they'll actually remember it. So many educations, what they're doing is they're gearing toward the test. They're trying to put in enough information that this kid's going to remember this until they take the test. And then guess what? After the test, 70% of that information is gone. But if we can somehow tie in what they're learning to the people that mean something to them, to the experiences that mean something to them, to their memories, it is to what they're doing, how they're working with their hands, that their math skills have to do with their setting up a loom to weave, or to the angle they're carving on their woodworking project, then suddenly these things take on meaning. And what we have tried to do is take education and make it a part of life, that our whole life is the classroom. So Benjamin Franklin said it very nicely: tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. So we're trying to do that. And that was and is the goal of our writing curriculums. Right words is to remember, to write down your experiences, the things that impact you, and remember and learn your grammar through that. The expository writing book, Mastering Words, is also a way of organizing the things that you learn, that you experience, so that you can continue doing school if you are traveling down the road, as we have. We travel between our communities to try to help and to teach, and you can continue your education. Take those 2 books with you and have a family workshop right in the car, discussing the Oregon Trail and what happened, the pilgrims that came to this area, Lewis and Clark over here, and try to really be an opportunist. And in order to be that opportunist and make every part of your life and education for your children, you have to open your eyes. You have to be willing to see, and you have to be willing to invest, but it's so worth it. And I would say that has been and is the goal of our curriculum, is to elevate those reading and writing skills in such a way that every family can take them and apply them to what they're doing and learn from them and grow those grammar skills, those writing skills right along with that process.